Happy rainy day.
Yeah, the weather is went from what, 80 yesterday?
Oh, I think it was almost 90.
Was it 90?
Yeah.
Yeah, and now it's rainy and cold and I'm in a sweater.
Yep, I wore a Patagonia today. So
Yeah, I thought we'd put those away for the season.
yeah, exactly.
Nice.
I had to cover up all my peonies and roses and all that.
You know, I basically built a greenhouse in my backyard because I just planted like $1,000 worth of plants.
Yes, I know. I had to take I haven't planted all my vegetables yet, which is good, but I had to bring in all my potted plants and bring them into my garage, and now my garage is a jungle and I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's about how it goes. You're listening to the Mailbox Money Podcast with Cody Burton
And Rebecca Scott.
So speaking of changes, we have changing weather. We also have a changing market and rumors of a recession.
Climate change. Am I right? I'm just kidding.
All sorts of change. So do we want to talk a bit about that? I know we talked
do
about
it.
rates a few weeks ago, and we can maybe jump into the market and the rumors of a recession, rumors of a crash.
So with interest rates rising, first of all, do we want to get into why?
You're listening to the Mailbox Money Podcast with Cody Burton
and Rebecca Scott. The short of it is when inflation continues to go up, because, you know, we've had money being pumped into our economy for the last 6 years or so. That is a recipe for inflation. There's no way around it. When you pump money into the economy, inflation happens. And so the only way to combat inflation is just raising the interest rates. So with that, people have started to panic for a recession or a crash or whatever that may be. So let's kind of dissect that and see what that entails.
Yep. So being that we talk about real estate, probably let's start with the potential for a crash and then maybe just move into a recession as broader.
Great.
What do you think? I don't think a crash is coming.
I don't think a full-on crash is coming. Will the market plateau a little bit? Yeah, maybe. When people are saying maybe we see a recession, I ask them, what does that look like for you? You know, does a recession mean rather than 40 offers on a property, we have 2?
Yeah, sure. If that's your definition, I think we can see that.
I mean, sure, we've seen a slowdown. I mean, truly, instead of 40 offers, now we're seeing 10. I personally think that's good.
Yeah. Yeah, it's balanced.
It's balanced. We haven't had a balanced market in a decade.
Yeah, not here in Colorado. I mean, for me, you know, I keep talking to clients about this because they hear it on the news or whatever, and it's, you know, should we wait should we wait for a crash to come and then we can buy at lower discounts? And you know, I keep telling my clients absolutely not, because the people you're listening to that are saying, "Oh, wait, it's just around the corner," are the same people that were saying, "Oh, wait, it's just around the corner" when we moved here 5 years ago.
Absolutely.
And now our house that we bought 4 years ago is worth almost double. So it's like the people saying to wait have missed out on all of that.
And if you say that it's going to crash every single year, statistically, one of the years you will be correct.
Eventually you'll be right. Yeah, exactly. It's that sky is falling sort of Chicken Little principle.
Exactly.
But the thing I keep going back to is simply supply.
Yeah.
You know, nationally, I just read a thing from Freddie Mac. Nationally, they estimate that we are behind about 3 million homes compared to what demand is. So there's a shortage of 3 million homes there. And on top of that, we also are not building at the same rates we were in, you know, 2006 or previously. We've never returned to those rates. So the supply isn't being bolstered while demand is just stronger than ever.
Right. And with the millennials, again, going into the age group where they can actually afford houses, there's so many millennials that it's only going to be growing.
Yeah, 1 out of 3 homes is a first-time home buyer. And so, you know, like we were just talking about supply, that's not helping it, because it's not like people are buying a new home and selling their old one. 1 out of every 3 homes being bought doesn't produce another home in inventory coming to the market.
Right.
So I think that right there is my initial impression that, like, we're not headed towards a crash because there's nothing to crash. There aren't enough homes compared to demand.
And like we've talked about before, so much of 2008, 2009 really was a lending issue.
Mm-hmm.
It was a lending issue. It was a realtor issue. Everybody was responsible to some degree of the crash and the issues going on, but we have put in so many laws and restrictions to avoid that. It's a lot harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're no longer seeing stated income. You have so many checks and balances in the lending world. So that also helps. Also, I kind of want to look at the word recession a little differently, because here's the problem with quote unquote going into a recession. I honestly don't see that as a bad word right now, because we have been in a heavy sellers market for so long that we've had as low as 1 week of inventory. We should have 6 months of inventory for a balanced market, anywhere between 4 and 6 months. So in order to have a balanced market to where, hey, buyers no longer have to waive inspection, waive appraisal, waive their entire, the right to their first child in order to get a house, maybe now we can negotiate and sellers have a little bit responsibility of like, yeah, let's clean out the sewer for you because it cost me $100. But right now they're like, nah, don't want to do it. I know you're going to buy it anyway.
Yep.
So maybe a recession really isn't a swear word in this market.
Yep. And, there may be some people listening to this saying, oh, a recession's always bad because, one of the definitions of a recession is rising unemployment,
Yeah.
Oh my God, you want people to be unemployed?
Yeah.
But here in Denver, at least, our unemployment right now is below what's considered a healthy rate. I think healthy is 4.5%, if I'm remembering right. Our unemployment rate here in Denver is hovering around 3%. So by that definition, we have more jobs than we have people to work them.
Yeah.
So even from that perspective.
Well, and you can talk to our recruiter, and my husband's actually in the job market right now, and it is bananas. I'm talking companies are having to convince people to work at their company more so than anything else. So like they are trying to talk people into working at the company rather than just giving them an offer. And like, of course they're going to say yes because they're desperate. They're like, I'm going to use this to pit this offer against a different offer. And as a hiring manager right now, I've seen it firsthand. I have been trying to hire so many people in Phoenix and Salt Lake City, and I can't, because by the time, like if our hiring cycle is more than 2 weeks, they've already found a job.
Yep. They're just gone.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I believe it. Things are absolutely crazy right now. And, with the job market, with everything, like everything is so ramped up to such a level.
Yeah.
A little bit of a cool down would not be a bad thing.
No, it really wouldn't.
Although, going back to what you talked about 2008, people borrowing crazy, I honestly don't think a recession is even coming. I was just reading through the report that Visa put out, which I know makes me sound super fun.
Continue.
But I was just reading through a report Visa put out saying that they are seeing spending only increase. Typically, one of the first signs of a recession is a drop in demand, a drop in discretionary spending. And right now they're seeing that increase, but what they called it was a healthy level, meaning that spending is increasing, discretionary spending especially is increasing, but it's not increasing past the point that people can pay it back. And so to your point about lending standards, people are less heavily leveraged than they were going into 2008. People have more discretionary money to spend because they aren't so strapped as tight on a budget. They have more equity in their homes on average. The average American has a higher credit score than they did in going into 2008.
Amazing.
So it's like all of these markers that led into that big crash, we're not seeing it here. People, especially in the housing market, people have equity. If they need to get out of a home, they can just sell it. We're not going to see widespread foreclosures. I know in 2021, you may or may not know this. I thought this was super interesting. In the Denver market, do you want to guess how many foreclosures we had?
I love this game. In 2021.
2021, yep. So January all the way through
400.
December. Nope.
4,000.
The Denver market.
The Denver market. 12.
Just Denver. One.
Oh my god.
We had one foreclosure in 12 months last year.
Oh my word. Well, I know that was a huge thing that we were watching back in when I first started at Atlas in 2016. They were saying they had the owners of our company, they had a tight pulse on the foreclosure market because in 2008, 2009, they saw everything go into market, and that's when they started snatching things up. But now they stopped even attending the
foreclosure auctions.
The foreclosure auctions because there was nothing to buy.
Yeah.
And the list used to be so long that you didn't have time to even look up where all these properties were. You just had to know, because you just had to know, okay, I know this address is in this area, and so circle that one, bid. It was absolutely bananas.
Yeah. And, I think going back to 2008, and I don't want the podcast to be totally about 2008, but going back to it, because that is the most recent crash. It's what's in everybody's mind. And I think it's caused this correlation where people hear recession and they automatically think real estate crash.
Yeah.
But that's really not true. We had 2008, we saw about a 20% drop in prices. That's huge. However, going back over the past 6 recessions, 2001 was our last big recession before 2008. And we actually saw prices continue to increase at about 6% through that recession.
Yeah.
And so it's not necessarily linked together. Same thing with 1980. Again, 6% increase on appreciation. So we saw, like you said, less offers. We saw a more balanced market. But even though the economy as a whole was in recession, the housing market continued to chug along just at a slower pace than it had the years leading up to it.
Do you know what's always fascinating to me during these times? And I see it on a very small scale of condos have not been selling well here in the Denver area. And so I have a couple people selling condos, and we'll put it on the market. And there's a weird psychology behind, oh my gosh, that property's been on the market for 2 weeks. What's wrong with it? Seriously.
Yep.
And
I've seen it.
Even if it's a single family house and maybe you list it on a Monday or something like that, and it's been on the market until the next Monday, people are like 7 days, there's obviously something wrong with this property because they're used to it going in 30 seconds. And so I wonder how the psychology of this will really affect it, because just like the stock market is the psychology of humans, right? Like that's all the stock market is. And so it will be interesting to see how that aspect of human psychology affects the real estate market, because I think that will actually be people panicking for whatever reason, even if they don't know why they should be panicking, or they're not researched, or whatever the case, or they listen to the news all the time.
They don't listen to this podcast.
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
why. Yeah.
But if you just are constantly consuming fear-mongering information, then you'll panic. And so that psychology, I think, will affect the real estate market more than we, take account for.
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a certain aspect of human nature that comes into it. And whether it stays on market or, people's memories are so short. People are freaking out about rates right now.
Yeah.
And it's like, on average, we're still at historically low rates. Yes, we're at, 4 or 5% for, single family home that you want to live in. But that being said, if you look historically and like average out rate year over year from 2022 back to, I think, 1960 or so, I think the average rate is like 8.5%.
Yeah.
So we're still well less than that.
Totally.
Depending on how well qualified you are, you might be half of that.
Yeah.
And so, like you said, psychology, people's memories are short.
Yeah.
And, if we do go into recession, like you said, it's going to be one that is specifically kind of forced almost to slow down inflation. And typically when we've seen forced recessions, for lack of a better term, the housing market has fared even better.
Yeah.
So I don't see a housing crash coming, especially here in Denver.
Yeah.
I do wonder, and this is something I've been thinking about lately, is with COVID, with people working remotely, with employers having to kind of fight to get employees right now, and working from home or working part-time from home being kind of a big draw, how much we're going to see individual um, towns or counties affected by people who maybe technically work in that county but live, in this county. And so I'm wondering if we're going to see more of like a shift to, like almost like a microeconomic level of certain areas being affected more than others because it's about where people want to live, not necessarily where they have to live to have a good job, which is what we've seen forever, before 2020.
And that's honestly why people might start moving to the middle of the country.
Yeah.
And who knows how long that will last. All of these things ebb and flow, right? Even the Denver downtown during 2020, everybody was leaving downtown.
It was a ghost town, yeah.
It was a ghost town. And so everybody was buying in the suburbs and trying to get land and a single family house and whatnot. Well, now everyone's kind of slowly going back to downtown Denver, and trying to get a house that's closer to, with walkability and closer to things, right? So it just, even that alone is an example of how the entire, on a small scale, but how the entire country will operate. Maybe we go to the middle of the country where things are cheaper and you can get more land and, whatever. And then after a while, it's like, well, let's go back to where we want to live,
Yeah. And I think, going back to the point, people's memories are short, right? Everybody wanted to get out to the suburbs. And I think give it a couple years, especially if work from home does continue in a strong way.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see people prioritize walkability. They want to, pop down to a local restaurant for lunch because they are home.
Yeah.
I think we're going to see an explosion of people moving back to cities in 2 years.
Absolutely, because people want to be alone only for so long, and then they realize that they actually like being around humans.
They value community, yeah.
Community is massive.
Absolutely. So, that's what I think is coming for the housing market. It sounds like we are kind of on the same page. How do you think that affects the investment market for rentals, in particular for landlords?
That's a great question, Cody. I think it's really important to note that, as you said earlier, there are 3 million houses that need to be built in order for us to catch up with the demand, right? But there's even more so. I don't remember the exact number, but it's something, I know it's more than double that 3 million mark.
I think it's close to 8, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. We need that many rentals. So there's still an even bigger demand for rentals to happen. And we also need density within cities. That's something that some cities have figured out in a great way and others have not. But when we can go down a rabbit hole of shortages of water and whatnot, but we need density like multifamily properties in suburbs of cities and within cities in order to create an economy that can fuel some of this like climate change and some of the other issues that we're facing.
Yeah, and that seems like something we're really not seeing, we've both said there's a huge shortage in rentals and especially affordable rentals.
Yeah.
And it seems to me like, at least in the markets we're in, what's getting built is either high-end luxury units or it's these really large-scale, more affordable developments that are in less desirable areas. So like here, they're way out on the east side towards the airport. Just because land is too valuable and materials have gone up so much. And so, I think we're going to see a real demand for those multifamily properties on the more desirable areas.
Right. The other interesting thing is these big developments of just what seemingly average housing costs. I mean, these developments are starting at $700,000.
Yeah.
For a new build that's like a very modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath, unfinished basement.
Yep.
And so you're right. We absolutely need more houses being built that are of affordable caliber. And affordable is obviously relative. However, if we can get some multifamily built in a lot of these developments, we can lower the costs of some living, and people can live in places that they want to live, and they can
actually afford to do it.
And actually afford to do it. Yeah. So it is interesting to kind of talk about that as well.
Yep. And that's one thing that we look at on the investment side is we kind of buy in those areas where we're not seeing those permits for those big 200 unit developments go in next door. And so it kind of becomes a supply and demand issue. Like, there aren't many in the area. If you own them, you can charge the rent for them. And what, Michael and I like doing in particular is buying those places that have been very rundown, making them nice so they're still affordable for the area, but they're also a nice place to live.
Yeah.
It's giving people a quality of life in an area that they may not be able to afford otherwise.
Yeah, absolutely. So to recap everything, we are in a demand area, and maybe that's just Denver and the markets that we're buying in, but as a whole, needing 3 million houses or living spaces for people, that's a countrywide issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, overall, I think I understand why people are hesitant. It seems like the brakes have come off the market, whether it's inflation or the housing market or whatever. So I do understand the hesitancy to think that a crash is coming, that a recession is coming. But realistically, when you boil down and break into those numbers, I mean, we are in a huge demand market. We have a huge lack of supply. We are not seeing building to meet that supply anytime soon. By some estimates, it would take 10 years to build up our housing supply to meet demand. And that's if builders go back to 2006 levels, which we're not even seeing.
I've read so many articles saying that we will never get back to where we should be
Yeah,
in our lifetime.
I believe it. So, simple economics, supply and demand. There's not enough supply. There's a lot of demand. We have millennials and younger making up half the population in the U.S., meaning that 30% of new home buyers that I referenced earlier is only going to go up. Driving demand. I think we have COVID rearranging where people want to live and work, driving demand in those areas even more. And then we have healthier families, healthier balance sheets that aren't stretched to the breaking point. They don't carry a ton of debt like they did in 2006, 2007. Higher credit scores, higher ability to liquidate if they need to because of equity. So I don't really see anything pointing towards any sort of major recession. And I think that's kind of the takeaway.
Yeah.
And to wrap things up even more, this is the thing we always preach is we don't try to time the market anyway.
Right.
We try to buy something personally at least once a year, just like you do with stocks. You put a little bit out of every paycheck into the stock market. We put a little bit of every paycheck into savings, and we try to buy another investment property every year. So
right.
Those two things together, I'm not worried about it. I think right now our jobs is to help our clients and take away that anxiety and educate them a little bit about what's really going on.
Yeah.
And try to combat some of that sensationalism we see in the news and online.
Absolutely. Well, Cody, thanks for sharing all your knowledge.
I think this was a good one, but yeah, I hope we've helped to shed some light on it. And if you think we're out of our minds and the sky's gonna fall down, we'd love to hear from you. Or if you still have questions, like hit us up on Instagram, and maybe it'll inspire a whole nother episode.
Heck yeah.
That's it for this week. Like I already said, we have an Instagram. Check us out there, Mailbox Money Podcast. We also have an email if you want to shoot an email our way, mailboxmoneypodcast@gmail.com. We're on, TikTok, Facebook, all the socials. We love to interact with people that are listening to the podcast. We have kind of seen it blow up the last few weeks, so it's been really cool. So if you're a new listener, thank you so much for listening. And if you are an OG listener, thank you so much for sticking around. And on that note, we'll catch you next week.